Across the endless, wind-swept plains of the Mongolian steppe, life was a constant struggle against both the elements and neighboring clans. This harsh, unforgiving landscape, stretching hundreds of miles with bitter winters and scorching summers, shaped the people who would one day dominate much of Eurasia. By the late 12th century, the Mongols were not a unified nation, but a fragmented collection of nomadic tribes, each fiercely independent and often at war with one another. Resources were scarce, and the competition for pasture, water, and survival was relentless. It was in this crucible of hardship and rivalry that the foundations of a formidable military society were forged. The Mongols were descendants of various steppe peoples who had migrated and mixed over centuries, including Turkic and Mongolic-speaking clans. Among these were the Borjigin, the family line into which Temujin, later Genghis Khan, was born in 1162 near Delyuan-Boldog, in what is today northern Mongolia. Temujin was born into a small chieftain family, the son of Yasugei, a minor leader of the Borjigin clan. From the beginning, his life was shaped by the precarious nature of steppe politics and survival. The Mongol tribes operated under a system of alliances, blood feuds, and loyalty through kinship, and any misstep could mean exile or death. Temujin's childhood was marked by dramatic upheaval. When he was around 9 years old, his father was poisoned by members of a rival clan, leaving his family vulnerable. The young boy, his mother Holon, and his siblings were abandoned by their clan allies and left to survive on their own in the harsh steppe. Starvation and exposure were constant threats, and Temujin learned the critical lessons of leadership, endurance, and resilience in these formative years. Holon herself was a remarkable woman of intelligence and determination who kept the family together, teaching Temujin the importance of loyalty, strategy, and political negotiation. These early experiences instilled in him a combination of cunning, ruthlessness, and foresight that would define his leadership in the decades to come. The social structure of the Mongol tribes was complex. Power was often decentralized, and tribal leaders relied on personal loyalty and martial prowess rather than formal bureaucracy. Clans were often in shifting alliances. Friends could become enemies overnight. Temujin understood that to rise above this chaos, he would need to unify these fractured clans under a single vision. Even as a young man, he began to cultivate alliances based not on birthright alone, but on merit and loyalty, creating a personal network of trusted followers who would later form the backbone of his army. During his adolescence, Temujin also encountered the broader world of steppe politics. He was captured and enslaved briefly by a rival clan, the Taichud, and he escaped through cunning and courage. These experiences reinforced his understanding that survival on the steppe required not only martial skill, but also intelligence, patience, and the ability to turn enemies into allies. By his 20s, Temujin had begun to consolidate power within his own clan and forge alliances with other tribes, combining military strength with strategic marriages and diplomatic negotiation. The Mongols of this era were remarkable horsemen, skilled with the bow and adept at living off the land. Mobility was their greatest strength. The environment itself, with its vast distances and unpredictable conditions, demanded that warriors be adaptable, resourceful, and resilient. These qualities were not merely practical. They became deeply embedded in Mongol culture and identity. Hunting, herding, and raiding were intertwined, and from a young age, Temujin and his peers learned to read the land, anticipate the movements of enemies, and make rapid, calculated decisions under pressure. By the 1180s and 1190s, Temujin was emerging as a leader with a reputation for fairness and ruthlessness in equal measure. He began to attract followers from multiple clans, those disillusioned with their current leaders or impressed by his combination of strength, intelligence, and fairness in adjudicating disputes. It was during this period that he began to challenge rival leaders, slowly building the foundation for a united Mongol confederation. He emphasized discipline and meritocracy in his growing army, often promoting men based on ability rather than lineage, a radical departure from traditional steppe norms that relied heavily on aristocratic birthright. By the late 12th century, the Mongol tribes were caught in a cycle of continuous conflict and shifting allegiances. Raids, counter-raids, and feuds dominated life. But Temujin's emerging coalition offered something unprecedented: the promise of stability, law, and protection for those who joined him. He cultivated a code of conduct that rewarded loyalty, punished betrayal, and maintained strict order among his followers. His vision extended beyond immediate survival. He sought a lasting unification that would allow the Mongols to wield influence far beyond the steppe. Temujin's rise was not only military, but also deeply cultural and political. He respected the diverse customs of the steppe peoples and often incorporated conquered tribes into his growing coalition. Religious tolerance was another hallmark. He allowed shamanic traditions, Buddhism, and other practices to coexist, understanding that cultural flexibility strengthened political cohesion. This approach earned him respect among allies and fear among enemies, who quickly learned that rebellion against him could be as dangerous as the harshest winter on the steppe. By 1200, Temujin had consolidated the majority of Mongol tribes into a formidable confederation, setting the stage for the defining moment of his life. The fragmented steppe, once a land of perpetual chaos, had begun to unite under a single banner. The tribes he brought together were no longer disparate groups fighting for survival. They were becoming an organized, disciplined force capable of extraordinary feats of warfare, trade, and governance. The story of Temujin's early life is not merely the tale of a boy overcoming hardship. It is the story of the Mongol people themselves, shaped by environment, culture, and the constant struggle for survival. These factors coalesce to produce a leader capable of envisioning and executing one of the most remarkable expansions in human history. By the time he was proclaimed Genghis Khan in 1206, Temujin had transformed from a vulnerable orphan boy into a visionary leader ready to unite the Mongols and set in motion a chain of events that would reverberate across continents. The endless steppe, with its unforgiving winters, scorching summers, and vast open plains, had forged the Mongols into a people of extraordinary resilience, adaptability, and ambition. In these early decades, the foundations of the Mongol Empire were laid not merely through conquest, but through the cultivation of loyalty, law, and strategy. It was here, in this inhospitable land, that the stage was set for Genghis Khan to rise, unite, and transform the world forever. The story of the Mongols would not begin with armies or battles, but with survival, ingenuity, and the vision of a boy who would come to conquer the world. By the dawn of the 13th century, the Mongol steppe was a turbulent patchwork of warring clans, each seeking dominance over limited pasture lands and water sources. Tribes fought incessantly, and alliances were fragile, often dissolving after a single dispute or betrayal. Into this chaos emerged Temujin, the boy who had survived betrayal, exile, and starvation. Now a man of remarkable vision, he had spent decades consolidating power, forging alliances, and demonstrating both cunning and ruthlessness in equal measure. His reputation for fairness toward loyal followers and mercilessness toward enemies had set him apart from other leaders of the steppe. In 1206, a defining moment arrived. A Kurultai, a grand assembly of Mongol chieftains, was convened to select a supreme leader who could unite the fractious tribes. Temujin's military successes, political acumen, and ability to command loyalty made him the natural choice. The Kurultai proclaimed him Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. This title was not merely symbolic. It marked the formal unification of the Mongol tribes under a single, centralized authority, and it set the stage for the creation of an empire that would span continents. Central to Genghis Khan's consolidation of power was his implementation of the Yasa, a codified legal system that combined law, military regulation, and governance. The Yasa was comprehensive and pragmatic. It punished theft, betrayal, and desertion, regulated relations among tribes, and established strict discipline in the army. It prohibited the kidnapping of women and children in allied territories, ensured the protection of religious freedom, and emphasized loyalty to the Khan above all else. While portions of the Yasa were secret and remain lost to history, chroniclers such as Rashid al-Din describe it as an innovative system that brought order to the chaotic steppe and allowed a rapidly expanding empire to function. Another key element of Genghis Khan's success was his reorganization of the military. He broke the army into decimal units, tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, called Arban, Zun, Mingan, and Tuman, respectively. Command was based on merit and loyalty, rather than aristocratic lineage. A capable warrior could rise rapidly through the ranks, fostering motivation, cohesion, and a culture of excellence. Mongol soldiers were highly mobile, expert horsemen who could travel vast distances in a single day, carrying supplies and performing complex maneuvers. This mobility, combined with strict discipline, made the Mongol army virtually unstoppable. Genghis Khan also demonstrated extraordinary skill in diplomacy and alliance building. He strategically married into other clans to secure loyalty, often using marriage as both a political tool and a means of cementing alliances. He integrated conquered tribes into his growing coalition, offering them positions of responsibility and encouraging them to adopt his system of military organization. This approach transformed the Mongol army into a unified, multi-tribal force that could execute sophisticated campaigns far beyond the steppe. One of the defining features of Genghis Khan's leadership was his understanding of psychological warfare. He cultivated fear among enemies while promoting loyalty and respect among allies. Tales of Mongol ruthlessness spread faster than the army itself, with entire cities surrendering rather than face the consequences of resistance. Yet this fear was tempered with pragmatic governance. Those who submitted without resistance were often treated well, allowed to maintain their local rulers, and integrated into the Mongol administration. This combination of terror and pragmatism created a formidable reputation that preceded his armies wherever they went. The unification of the Mongol tribes also enabled the establishment of a systematic intelligence network. Scouts and spies were deployed across the steppe and beyond, gathering information on enemy positions, terrain, and potential allies. This intelligence allowed Genghis Khan to plan campaigns with unprecedented precision, exploiting weaknesses in rival tribes and states. The ability to strike swiftly and unexpectedly became a hallmark of Mongol strategy, often overwhelming opponents before they could mobilize effectively. By 1206, Genghis Khan had not only unified the Mongol tribes, but had also laid the groundwork for the expansion of the empire. The political unification of the steppe was a monumental achievement in itself, given the long history of tribal fragmentation. Under his leadership, Mongol society became more meritocratic, disciplined, and cohesive. Loyalty to the Khan became the primary social bond, superseding previous clan rivalries, while the Yasa provided a legal and moral framework that governed behavior and maintained order. Genghis Khan's vision extended beyond the steppe. He understood that trade, diplomacy, and the integration of conquered peoples would be essential to sustaining an empire. The Silk Road, which stretched across Central Asia, offered opportunities for wealth and influence. By controlling trade routes, Genghis could ensure economic stability and gather intelligence on distant lands, preparing for future campaigns into regions such as China, Persia, and Eastern Europe. The consolidation of power also had cultural implications. Genghis Khan promoted religious tolerance, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and adherents of shamanic traditions to coexist under Mongol rule. This tolerance helped to stabilize his expanding coalition and facilitated the integration of diverse peoples into his growing empire. Scholars, artisans, and merchants were encouraged to travel, exchange ideas, and contribute to the prosperity and sophistication of Mongol-controlled territories. By the end of 1206, the Mongol tribes had been transformed. From a collection of scattered, warring clans, they had become a unified, disciplined, and strategically minded force under a single leader. Genghis Khan had demonstrated that vision, intelligence, and organization could triumph over centuries of fragmentation and chaos. The steppe itself, once a region defined by survival and conflict, had become the launching ground for one of history's greatest empires. This moment marked not only the rise of a single man, but the birth of a civilization capable of reshaping the known world. The Mongols were now poised to expand beyond their traditional borders, combining mobility, discipline, and fearsome reputation to conquer cities, kingdoms, and empires across Eurasia. What had begun as the unification of tribes on the steppe would, within a generation, grow into the largest contiguous empire in human history. The legacy of Genghis Khan's rise was profound. He had established a military, political, and social foundation that allowed the Mongols to conquer, govern, and integrate vast territories. The unification of the steppe was not merely a strategic achievement. It was a transformation of Mongol society itself. Loyalty, meritocracy, law, and pragmatism became the pillars upon which the empire would be built. By the end of 1206, the Mongols were no longer just nomads. They were a unified force, poised to change the world forever. By the late 1210s, Genghis Khan had solidified his control over the Mongol tribes and established a disciplined, unified army capable of executing complex campaigns across vast distances. Yet his ambitions extended far beyond the steppes of Mongolia. To the west lay the Khwarazmian Empire, a sprawling state encompassing modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and parts of Afghanistan. This empire, ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, was wealthy, strategically located along critical trade routes of the Silk Road, and an emerging power that both fascinated and threatened Genghis Khan. The pretext for conflict arose from a trade dispute in 1218. Genghis Khan, aware of the economic and political value of the region, sent a caravan of merchants to the city of Otrar as a gesture of goodwill and to establish trade relations. However, the governor of Otrar, suspecting espionage, seized the caravan and executed the merchants. In response, Genghis Khan sent 3 ambassadors to negotiate, as was customary under Mongol diplomatic practice. Shah Muhammad, distrustful and suspicious, executed one of the envoys and humiliated the others, violating established norms of diplomacy. This act of defiance against Mongol envoys was considered both an insult and a casus belli, a declaration of war. In 1219, Genghis Khan mobilized his forces for a campaign of unprecedented scale. The Mongol army, estimated at 90,000 to 100,000 soldiers, included not only Mongols, but also allied tribes integrated into the army through loyalty and merit-based promotion. The campaign demonstrated Genghis Khan's mastery of strategy, mobility, and intelligence gathering. Scouts and spies were sent ahead to map terrain, assess defenses, and sow discord among enemy forces. The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, spreading rumors of their ruthlessness and the futility of resistance before a single arrow was loosed. The campaign began with a series of lightning raids that targeted key Khwarazmian cities. In 1219, Otrar fell swiftly. The Mongols, employing siege tactics that combined direct assault with encirclement and starvation, crushed the city's defenses. The governor, who had provoked the conflict, was executed along with other leaders. This victory sent a clear message. Defiance against Genghis Khan would be met with decisive retribution. Next came Bokhara, a center of learning, commerce, and culture. In 1220, the Mongols laid siege to the city. Using a combination of psychological pressure, encirclement, and controlled bombardment, they overwhelmed Bokhara's defenses. Chroniclers describe the city being plundered, with artisans, scholars, and citizens either killed or enslaved, while trade infrastructure was left largely intact to serve Mongol interests. The destruction of Bokhara served as a grim warning to other cities. Resistance was dangerous, but surrender offered protection and the opportunity for survival under Mongol rule. The Mongols continued their westward advance, taking Samarkand after a protracted siege in 1220. Samarkand, renowned for its wealth and strategic importance, was defended fiercely by its governor, who believed that the city's formidable walls could withstand any army. Yet the Mongols, combining siege engineering with relentless cavalry pressure and strategic feints, captured the city after several weeks. Samarkand's fall marked a turning point. It demonstrated the Mongols' ability to conquer heavily fortified urban centers, a capability that few had thought possible for nomadic warriors. Finally, in 1221, the campaign reached Urgench, another major city of the Khwarazmian Empire. Here, the Mongols employed one of their most infamous tactics: systematic destruction and selective sparing. The city was leveled, its population decimated, and its leaders executed. This scorched earth approach, though brutal, ensured that resistance would be minimal elsewhere. Across Central Asia, the Mongols established dominance, leaving a network of cities and trade routes under their control. The conquest of the Khwarazmian Empire showcased not only Genghis Khan's military genius, but also his strategic foresight. He preserved key trade routes along the Silk Road, ensuring the continued flow of commerce and wealth into the Mongol realm. By integrating captured engineers, artisans, and administrators into his growing empire, Genghis Khan demonstrated that conquest was not merely destruction. It was also about governance, infrastructure, and long-term economic stability. This campaign also had profound geopolitical implications. The collapse of the Khwarazmian Empire opened Central Asia to further Mongol expansion, facilitating later campaigns into the Middle East, Russia, and Eastern Europe. It disrupted existing power balances, toppled ruling elites, and created a vacuum that the Mongols would exploit with remarkable efficiency. The campaign also spread the Mongol reputation for ruthlessness across Eurasia. Chroniclers from Persia, the Middle East, and even Europe recorded tales of cities being annihilated and populations decimated, creating a psychological impact that preceded the Mongol army itself. Genghis Khan's success in Central Asia was also due to his ability to adapt tactics to local conditions. The Mongols, traditionally a steppe cavalry, learned siege techniques from captured engineers and applied them effectively against stone-walled cities. They coordinated multi-pronged attacks, used deception to lure defenders into traps, and maintained strict discipline to prevent looting from undermining strategic objectives. Their combination of speed, adaptability, and ruthless precision created a model of warfare that would be emulated for centuries. Yet the campaign was not solely about brutality. Genghis Khan recognized the importance of administration and long-term control. He appointed loyal governors and administrators, often drawn from local populations, to manage conquered territories. These officials collected tribute, maintained order, and ensured the functioning of trade routes. Cities that submitted without resistance were often spared widespread destruction, creating a pragmatic system that balanced terror with governance. By 1221, the Mongol campaign against the Khwarazmian Empire had achieved its objectives. The empire was effectively destroyed, key cities were under Mongol control, and trade networks were secured. Genghis Khan had demonstrated that the Mongols could conquer not only nomadic rivals, but also sophisticated urban civilizations. The lessons learned about siegecraft, logistics, intelligence, and psychological warfare would be applied in future campaigns across China, Persia, and Europe. The Khwarazmian campaign cemented the Mongols' reputation as an unstoppable military force. It also marked the beginning of a new phase in Eurasian history, one in which the Mongol Empire would dominate vast swathes of territory, connecting east and west, reshaping trade, culture, and geopolitics. The fall of Bokhara, Samarkand, and Urgench was not merely a series of conquests. It was the first demonstration of the Mongols' ability to create an empire that could combine mobility, strategy, and administration, laying the foundation for the greatest contiguous empire in human history. In these campaigns, Genghis Khan transformed the Mongols from a unified steppe coalition into a force capable of reshaping the known world. What had begun as a response to a trade dispute became a sweeping conquest, illustrating the deadly efficiency of the Mongols and foreshadowing their future campaigns across Asia and Europe. From the frozen plains of Mongolia to the wealthy cities of Central Asia, the Mongols had announced their arrival on the world stage as a force defined by strategy, mobility, and the terrifying precision of their campaigns. While the Mongols were establishing dominance across Central Asia, Genghis Khan's gaze also turned eastward toward China, a region of immense wealth, population, and strategic significance. The northern Chinese states, particularly the Jin Dynasty and the smaller Western Xia, represented both opportunity and challenge. Unlike the steppe in Central Asia, these territories were densely populated, fortified, and economically sophisticated. For the Mongols, conquering them would require innovation, strategy, and an unprecedented ability to adapt from nomadic warfare to siegecraft. The first campaign against China began in 1211, targeting the Jin Dynasty, which controlled northern China, including the fertile Yellow River Basin. The Jin, ruled by Emperor Xuanzong, were experienced in defending their territory but underestimated the threat posed by the Mongols. Genghis Khan, understanding the limitations of direct assault against fortified cities, relied on a combination of mobility, deception, and psychological warfare. He also incorporated engineering expertise obtained from captured craftsmen and prisoners, enabling the Mongols to execute sieges on a scale previously unseen for steppe warriors. The Mongol army advanced with remarkable speed, striking towns and cities along key routes while avoiding prolonged engagements unless strategically advantageous. Genghis Khan divided his forces into multiple wings to encircle cities, cut off supply lines, and prevent reinforcements. This approach, coupled with the Mongols' unmatched cavalry mobility, allowed them to outmaneuver the Jin forces repeatedly. The psychological impact of these campaigns was profound. The Mongols' reputation for ruthlessness spread ahead of their armies, compelling some cities to surrender without a fight. One of the earliest and most significant engagements was the Siege of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, in 1215. The city was heavily fortified, with walls designed to withstand prolonged assaults. Genghis Khan's army, employing engineers and siege weapons, bombarded the walls and breached defenses through coordinated attacks. After capturing the city, the Mongols carried out mass killings of resisting inhabitants while incorporating craftsmen, scholars, and other valuable personnel into the Mongol administration. The fall of Zhongdu marked a turning point. It demonstrated that the Mongols could conquer not only steppe nomads and Central Asian cities, but also highly organized, fortified urban centers. Simultaneously, Genghis Khan targeted the Western Xia, a smaller state located in the mountainous regions of northwestern China. Unlike the Jin, Western Xia was more fragmented and politically unstable, which Genghis exploited through a combination of military pressure and strategic diplomacy. The first campaigns against Western Xia began in 1209 to 1210, escalating over the years into a full-scale invasion. By 1227, the Western Xia were decisively defeated, their capital destroyed, and their rulers executed. This campaign coincided with the final years of Genghis Khan's life, demonstrating his commitment to securing China's northwest frontier as part of his broader vision for the Mongol Empire. The Mongols' success in China relied heavily on innovative siege tactics. Nomadic cavalry alone could not breach the massive stone walls of Chinese cities, so the Mongols adapted by employing trebuchets, catapults, and scaling techniques. Captured engineers from China and Central Asia were pressed into service, teaching Mongol troops how to construct siege engines and conduct complex assaults. They also utilized diversionary tactics, including feigned retreats and psychological intimidation, to weaken defenders before committing to full-scale attacks. Genghis Khan's approach to conquest was not purely destructive. He recognized the value of administrative integration. After capturing a city, the Mongols often allowed local rulers to maintain a degree of authority, provided they pledged loyalty to the Khan and paid tribute. This pragmatic approach reduced resistance, preserved the economic infrastructure, and allowed the Mongols to extract revenue while consolidating control. In areas where resistance persisted, the Mongols were ruthless, using massacres and terror to deter future uprisings. The campaigns against the Jin and Western Xia also revealed Genghis Khan's broader strategic vision. He sought not merely territorial expansion, but also the securing of trade routes, particularly along the Silk Road, and the subjugation of regions critical for future campaigns. The conquest of northern China provided access to fertile agricultural land, skilled labor, and resources essential for sustaining a growing empire. Moreover, it established Mongol authority over regions that would later become staging grounds for further campaigns into southern China and beyond. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongols had achieved remarkable success in China. Northern territories formerly under Jin control were now under Mongol administration, while Western Xia had been eliminated as an independent state. These conquests demonstrated the Mongols' ability to transition from nomadic raiders to rulers capable of managing urban, sedentary populations. They had combined mobility, discipline, and tactical innovation with governance and economic foresight, creating a model that would inform Mongol strategy for generations. The impact of these campaigns extended far beyond military conquest. The Mongols facilitated the flow of knowledge, trade, and culture across northern China, integrating local populations into a broader Eurasian network. Skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators were incorporated into Mongol-controlled territories, while previously isolated regions became linked to the emerging Mongol communications and trade systems. This integration would later enable the Mongols to sustain campaigns into Persia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe with remarkable efficiency. Moreover, the campaigns against the Jin and Western Xia reshaped the perception of the Mongols in the wider world. Observers in neighboring regions, including the Islamic world in Europe, recorded tales of Mongol mobility, discipline, and seemingly inexhaustible manpower. Cities fell rapidly, empires trembled, and the Mongols' reputation for ruthless efficiency spread far and wide. Their ability to combine terror with pragmatic administration created a dual legacy: fear among enemies and stability among those who submitted. The conquest of China's northern regions and the elimination of the Western Xia established a precedent that would guide Mongol strategy for decades. The Mongols demonstrated that they could conquer, govern, and extract value from highly sophisticated, sedentary civilizations, a crucial factor in their later campaigns against the Song Dynasty, the Khwarazmian Empire, and ultimately, European kingdoms. It also solidified the Mongol army's confidence in their capacity to overcome even the most fortified and well-defended cities, blending nomadic mobility with urban siegecraft to devastating effect. In sum, the campaigns against the Jin Dynasty and Western Xia were a testament to Genghis Khan's extraordinary leadership. They combined military innovation, psychological warfare, strategic diplomacy, and administrative foresight, transforming the Mongols from a unified steppe coalition into a sophisticated imperial force. By 1227, the Mongol presence in northern China was secure, Western Xia had been destroyed, and the Mongol Empire had established a foothold from which it would continue to expand. These victories not only demonstrated the Mongols' military genius, but also set the stage for the next phase of Eurasian domination, ensuring that Genghis Khan's legacy would endure long after his death. The year was 1227, and the Mongol Empire, forged by one man's vision and relentless ambition, had reached a level of power unprecedented in the history of the steppes. Genghis Khan, the boy who had survived exile, betrayal, and near starvation, had become the master of the largest unified nomadic empire in history. His armies had conquered vast territories across Central Asia, northern China, and the fringes of Persia, demonstrating a combination of tactical genius, discipline, and strategic foresight that left both allies and enemies in awe. Yet, even the most formidable empires must contend with the inevitability of mortality. Genghis Khan's final campaign was directed at the Western Xia, the kingdom located in the rugged terrain of northwestern China. The Western Xia had resisted Mongol domination for decades, and their mountainous fortresses posed a unique challenge to steppe cavalry. By 1226, Genghis Khan had launched a comprehensive military campaign aimed at fully subjugating the Western Xia and incorporating the region into his empire. The campaign involved multiple Mongol divisions, siege engines, and logistical planning on a scale previously unseen. These armies moved with the speed, coordination, and discipline that had become synonymous with Mongol conquest. Despite his advancing age, he was in his mid-60s, an age considered elderly by medieval standards. Genghis Khan personally led his forces, inspecting fortifications, coordinating assaults, and inspiring his troops with the same ferocity and determination that had marked his youth. Chroniclers such as Giovanni and Rashid al-Din describe him as tireless, relentless, and commanding even in the harshest conditions. He believed that no distance, terrain, or enemy could halt the Mongol momentum, and his presence on the battlefield motivated both soldiers and allied tribes to extraordinary feats of endurance and courage. It was during this campaign that Genghis Khan suffered the wound or illness that would end his life. Historical accounts differ, and the precise circumstances remain uncertain. Some sources suggest he was wounded during a battle against the Western Xia, perhaps falling from his horse or being struck by enemy forces. Others propose that he succumbed to illness, possibly exacerbated by the physical strains of prolonged campaigning and the rigors of age. Despite these uncertainties, the outcome was undeniable. In 1227, Genghis Khan died, leaving the Mongol Empire without its founding figure. The death of Genghis Khan was shrouded in secrecy and solemn ritual. To prevent political instability, the Mongols concealed his passing from the wider empire until arrangements for succession were made. According to tradition, his burial was conducted in accordance with Mongol customs, in a secret location, accompanied by a retinue of attendants and soldiers, with the intent of preserving his final resting place from discovery. The secrecy surrounding his tomb has endured for centuries, becoming one of history's enduring mysteries. Genghis Khan's passing presented immediate challenges. The Mongol Empire had been built around his personal authority, charisma, and military genius. Succession planning had been considered, But the enormity of the empire required careful division and coordination among his heirs. True to his foresight, Genghis had already designated his sons and key generals to inherit responsibility over specific regions, ensuring the continuity of governance and military command. This system of division, known as ulus, allowed the Mongol Empire to survive the death of its founder and continue expanding under capable leadership. The empire was divided among his four sons: Jochi, who controlled the western steppes and territories extending toward the Caspian Sea; Chagatai, who received Central Asia; Ögedei, who was appointed Great Khan to oversee the central administration and succession; and Talui, who governed the Mongol homelands in Mongolia. This division was both strategic and practical. It allowed for localized governance while maintaining nominal loyalty to the Great Khan, ensuring that the Mongol Empire remained a unified entity despite the absence of its founding figure. The impact of Genghis Khan's death on the Mongol army and the wider world cannot be overstated. For his followers, it was the end of an era defined by personal leadership, conquest, and transformation. Yet his vision had created a resilient system capable of continuing without him. His successors inherited not merely land and titles, but an entire military, administrative, and cultural apparatus that could sustain expansion and governance across vast distances. The foundations he had laid, from the Yasa legal code to the meritocratic military organization, ensured that the Mongol Empire was not dependent solely on a single individual. Genghis Khan's death also had profound implications for Eurasian geopolitics. The territories he had conquered, Central Asia, northern China, and portions of Persia, were now integrated into a larger imperial framework. Trade routes along the Silk Road flourished under Mongol control, and the flow of goods, ideas, and technologies was unprecedented in scope. Cities and regions previously isolated were now part of a connected empire, facilitating cultural exchange, economic growth, and the movement of peoples on a scale unseen before. Yet the Mongol legacy was not only administrative or economic, it was also cultural and psychological. Genghis Khan had instilled a code of loyalty, discipline, and strategic thinking that permeated Mongol society. His campaigns had demonstrated the effectiveness of meritocracy over aristocratic privilege, and his use of intelligence, reconnaissance, and psychological warfare would influence military strategy for generations. His reputation for ruthlessness, tempered by pragmatism in governance, ensured that fear and respect coexisted wherever Mongols held sway. The death of Genghis Khan also marked a turning point in the empire's expansion. While he had achieved extraordinary victories during his lifetime, his successors were now tasked with continuing campaigns beyond the borders he had established. Ögedei Khan, his third son, would lead the Mongols into Eastern Europe, while Talui and other generals extended control in China and Persia. The systems and strategies Genghis had developed provided the framework for these campaigns, allowing the Mongols to maintain momentum even in the absence of their founder. Despite his passing, the Mongol Empire remained a dynamic and adaptive force. The principles Genghis Khan established were discipline, mobility, psychological warfare, integration of conquered peoples, and the protection of trade networks, ensuring that the empire did not collapse with his death. Instead, it continued to expand and evolve, demonstrating the foresight and organizational genius of its founder. In this way, Genghis Khan's influence endured far beyond his lifetime, shaping the course of Eurasian history for decades to come. In retrospect, the death of Genghis Khan in 1227 was both an end and a beginning. It concluded the life of a man whose ambition, intellect, and ruthlessness had reshaped the world, but it also inaugurated a new chapter for the Mongol Empire. His vision, codified laws, and military innovations provided a template for successive leaders to follow, enabling the Mongols to achieve their historic expansions into Europe, the Middle East, and the entirety of China. Genghis Khan had not merely conquered land. He had constructed an enduring empire capable of surviving the loss of its most powerful and iconic figure. The legacy of Genghis Khan's life and death resonates to this day. From 1162 to 1227, he transformed the Mongols from a fragmented collection of clans into a unified and disciplined force capable of reshaping Eurasian geopolitics. His death, though a pivotal moment of uncertainty, did not halt the momentum he had created. The systems, strategies, and principles he established ensured that the Mongol Empire would not only endure but continue to expand, leaving a lasting imprint on the history of the world. With the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the Mongol Empire faced a pivotal moment. The unifying force of its founder was gone, leaving a vast, interconnected empire stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the borders of Central Asia. Yet Genghis had not left his empire rudderless. His third son, Ögedei Khan, was elected as the Great Khan in 1229 at a Kurultai, continuing the principle that the empire's leadership was chosen by consensus among the Mongol elite. Ögedei inherited not only his father's title, but also the immense task of consolidating an empire that had grown faster than any in human history. Ögedei's leadership marked a shift from consolidation to expansion. Recognizing that the momentum of conquest could not be squandered, he authorized campaigns into territories that had long evaded Mongol influence, including the principalities of Rus and the kingdoms of Eastern Europe. The Mongol military machine, refined under Genghis Khan's innovations, was now fully operational, capable of conducting simultaneous campaigns across The first major target was the Rus principalities, fragmented states along the rivers of modern Russia and Ukraine. These principalities had been politically divided, with local princes often in conflict with one another, which made them vulnerable to the Mongols' strategic approach. Between 1237 and 1240, Mongol armies swept across the Rus, employing a combination of rapid cavalry raids, psychological warfare, and siege techniques learned from previous campaigns in China and Central Asia. The city of Ryazan fell first in 1237. Chroniclers describe the city's inhabitants being overwhelmed by Mongol mobility and precision. Following Ryazan, Mongol forces captured Moscow, Vladimir, and Kozulsk, often using deception and feigned retreats to lure defenders out of fortified positions. The Mongols were not indiscriminate killers. Cities that surrendered peacefully were spared destruction, but those that resisted faced total annihilation. This selective brutality ensured compliance in subsequent campaigns and spread fear across Eastern Europe, creating a psychological advantage that often preceded the army itself. From the Rus lands, the Mongols moved into Poland and Hungary, demonstrating remarkable operational reach. In 1241, armies under the command of Generals Bada Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, and Subutai, one of the empire's greatest strategists, launched coordinated invasions that combined speed, encirclement, and deception. At the Battle of Legnica in April 1241, Mongol forces defeated a coalition of European knights, and local forces, employing superior reconnaissance, coordination, and the effective use of mounted archery. Meanwhile, in Hungary, at the Battle of Mohi in April 1241, the Mongols executed a devastating assault on Hungarian forces, demonstrating the lethal effectiveness of their combined arms tactics. While these campaigns unfolded in Europe, Mongol expansion continued in the east. The Mongols pressed on against the remnants of the Jin Dynasty in northern China, seeking to consolidate control over territories Genghis Khan had partially conquered. Mongol armies advanced along river valleys and plains, employing siege engines and engineering techniques to breach fortified cities, integrating both nomadic mobility and the technological innovations learned from Chinese engineers. By maintaining simultaneous campaigns on multiple fronts, Ögedei reinforced the Mongols' reputation as a military power capable of striking across vast distances with unparalleled speed and coordination. The European campaigns also highlighted the Mongols' strategic use of intelligence and logistics. Scouts and spies were deployed to monitor enemy movements, supply routes, and terrain, allowing the Mongols to anticipate attacks and exploit weaknesses. Supply lines were meticulously organized, ensuring that cavalry forces could travel hundreds of kilometers without succumbing to starvation or exhaustion. Horses, the backbone of Mongol mobility, were rotated and cared for with precision, allowing the army to maintain momentum in harsh environments. These logistical innovations allowed relatively small Mongol forces to achieve victories against larger, more established armies in Europe. Despite their success, the Mongols did not seek permanent occupation of European lands at this time. Instead, their campaigns were designed to weaken, intimidate, and subjugate, while gathering tribute and extending the empire's influence. Cities that surrendered were often incorporated into the Mongol trade and communication networks, while local rulers were required to pledge loyalty to the Great Khan. The Mongols' ability to combine conquest with pragmatic administration ensured that their influence persisted even in regions they did not fully occupy. The psychological impact of these campaigns was profound. European chroniclers were awed and terrified by reports of Mongol mobility, discipline, and destructive efficiency. Tales of cities being destroyed, armies annihilated, and populations massacred spread rapidly, creating a climate of fear that often preceded Mongol advances. This reputation for ruthlessness, coupled with their strategic use of terror, ensured that resistance was often minimized, demonstrating the Mongols' mastery of both military and psychological warfare. Ögedei's reign also emphasized the importance of administration and continuity. While Genghis Khan had established the framework, Ögedei worked to codify governance, taxation, and communication across the empire. Postal stations, known as yam, were expanded, allowing for the rapid dispatch of messages, coordination of troops, and collection of intelligence. Trade routes, particularly along the Silk Road, were secured and protected, facilitating the flow of goods, ideas, and technology across Eurasia. This administrative infrastructure ensured that the empire remained functional and cohesive even as it expanded into new territories. By 1241, the Mongol campaigns in Europe had reached their zenith, leaving behind a trail of conquered cities, tributary states, and shattered armies. Yet fate intervened. The sudden death of Ögedei Khan in December 1241 forced Mongol generals to withdraw from Central Europe to participate in the Kurultai that would select his successor. This unexpected pause in expansion prevented the Mongols from immediately establishing permanent rule over European territories. But the lessons of these campaigns, the effectiveness of mobility, psychological warfare, and strategic coordination remained as enduring legacies. The European campaigns under Ögedei Khan solidified the Mongol Empire as a global power capable of projecting force across thousands of kilometers. They demonstrated that the Mongol military system, developed under Genghis Khan, could adapt to diverse terrains, climates, and opponents from the steppes of Russia to the forests and plains of Poland and Hungary. By combining discipline, innovation, and ruthless efficiency, the Mongols ensured that their influence extended far beyond their immediate territories, leaving an indelible mark on Eurasian history. In summary, Ögedei Khan's reign from 1229 to 1241 was characterized by aggressive expansion, administrative consolidation, and unparalleled military innovation. The campaigns in Eastern Europe, alongside ongoing conquests in China, demonstrated the empire's operational flexibility, strategic intelligence, and psychological mastery. While Ögedei inherited the empire from his father, He expanded its boundaries and influence in ways that ensured the Mongols' position as the most formidable force in the medieval world. The victories achieved under his leadership laid the foundation for future generations of Mongol rulers, who would continue to shape Eurasian history for decades to come. The Mongol Empire, at its peak in the early 1240s, was a sprawling entity stretching from the Pacific steppes of Mongolia to the forests and plains of Eastern Europe. Yet the very success of the empire, built on rapid conquest and centralized authority under Genghis Khan, now faced a critical test: the challenge of succession and governance. The death of Ögedei Khan in 1241 triggered a period of uncertainty, fragmentation, and internal power struggles that would shape the trajectory of the empire for decades. Ögedei's death left the position of Great Khan vacant, initiating the traditional Mongol process of selecting a successor at a Kurultai, a council of the empire's leading nobles and generals. However, the logistics of assembling such a gathering across an empire spanning thousands of miles slowed the process. The European campaigns were abruptly halted, and Mongol forces that had reached the heart of Poland and Hungary withdrew to participate in the political deliberations. The empire, for the first time, demonstrated its vulnerability. Without a unifying leader, even the most disciplined army could not operate at full potential. In the immediate aftermath, Genghis Khan, Ögedei's son, was eventually elected Great Khan in 1246 after protracted negotiations and political maneuvering. His reign, however, would be brief and marked by tension with powerful factions within the empire, particularly the influential Talyuid family, descended from Genghis Khan's youngest son, Talyui. Gaiuk's authoritarian tendencies and efforts to centralize power alienated key allies and military leaders, revealing the fragility of an empire so dependent on the personal authority of its Great Khan. Gaiuk's death in 1248, after just 2 years of rule, plunged the empire into another period of uncertainty. It was during this interregnum that Möngke Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan through Talyui, emerged as the new Great Khan in 1251. Möngke's election was the result of careful negotiation, alliances, and the support of the Talyuid faction, which sought to consolidate influence and ensure that the empire's leadership remained within their line. Möngke's ascension represented a turning point. His leadership would combine military vigor, administrative reform, and a vision for consolidating Mongol authority across Eurasia. Möngke's early reign focused on restoring stability and asserting the authority of the Great Khan over the empire's vast territories. He faced immediate challenges. Local rulers in Central Asia and Persia operated with increasing autonomy. European tributary states questioned Mongol authority, and remnants of Jin and Western Xia territories in China required continued oversight. Möngke relied on a combination of diplomacy, administrative reform, and military campaigns to reassert control. Governors and generals were appointed with clear mandates, trade routes were secured, and tributary obligations were strictly enforced. At the same time, Möngke Khan initiated ambitious military campaigns aimed at expanding Mongol influence and consolidating gains from previous generations. In 1253, he launched operations against the Song dynasty in southern China, a sedentary civilization that had resisted previous Mongol attempts at subjugation. Campaigns in the Middle East and Persia were also pursued, targeting the remnants of the Khwarazmian Empire and preparing the ground for future invasions of the Levant. These campaigns underscored the empire's dual approach: expansion through conquest, coupled with meticulous administration. Despite these efforts, internal divisions persisted. The Mongol Empire, stretching from Europe to the Pacific, was simply too vast to be governed centrally without delegating considerable authority. Local khans and tribal leaders, while nominally loyal to the Great Khan, operated with considerable independence. The Golden Horde in the northwest, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the emerging Ilkhanate in Persia all demonstrated varying degrees of autonomy. While they coordinated military campaigns and paid tribute, the centralized authority of the Great Khan was increasingly symbolic rather than absolute in distant regions. These structural challenges were exacerbated by cultural and logistical factors. The Mongol Empire encompassed diverse populations, nomadic steppe tribes, sedentary urban civilizations, Islamic states, and Confucian bureaucracies. Governing such a heterogeneous population required compromise, tolerance, and administrative innovation. Möngke Khan and his advisors implemented policies aimed at stabilizing the empire, including codifying laws, promoting trade, and maintaining religious tolerance. Yet these efforts could not fully overcome the centrifugal forces inherent in an empire of unprecedented size. Succession crises, regional rivalries, and the personal ambitions of various Khans created a delicate balance. For example, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia occasionally challenged the authority of the Great Khan, while the Golden Horde increasingly focused on its own territorial expansion and integration with the Rus principalities. The Ilkhanate in Persia operated semi-independently, with its rulers balancing Mongol loyalties with local Persian interests. This decentralized structure, while pragmatic, sowed the seeds of fragmentation that would become more pronounced in subsequent generations. Despite these internal tensions, the Mongols maintained a remarkable level of military and administrative coherence. Möngke Khan emphasized meritocracy, appointing capable generals and officials based on ability rather than lineage. He strengthened the postal and communication systems, YAM, established by Genghis Khan and Ögedei, ensuring that orders, intelligence, and logistical support could traverse vast distances efficiently. Trade networks, particularly along the Silk Road, were secured, facilitating the movement of goods, ideas, and technologies across Eurasia. The period from 1241 to 1259 illustrates a critical phase in the Mongol Empire, the transition from personal, charismatic leadership under Genghis Khan and Ögedei to institutionalized governance under Möngke. While the empire faced internal strife and succession disputes, it also demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and the ability to maintain control over a vast, multi-ethnic, and geographically dispersed territory. The leadership changes of this era did not halt expansion, but rather reshaped the mechanisms through which the Mongols projected power, combining military efficiency with administrative innovation. By the end of Möngke Khan's early reign in 1259, the Mongol Empire had survived the deaths of two great Khans, navigated succession crises, and continued its campaigns across multiple fronts. The structural adaptations made during this period, division of ulus, the delegation of authority, the codification of laws, and the integration of conquered peoples, ensured that the empire remained a dominant force, capable of both conquest and governance. Internal strife had tested the resilience of the Mongols, but it had also forged a more adaptable and sustainable imperial system, one that would underpin the empire's later campaigns in China, the Middle East, and beyond. In conclusion, the period of internal strife and leadership changes from 1241 to 1259 was a formative era for the Mongol Empire. The deaths of Ögedei and Gayuk, combined with the challenges of governing vast and diverse territories, could have led to disintegration. Instead, through careful succession, administrative reform, and continued military campaigns under Möngke Khan, the Mongols maintained cohesion and prepared the empire for its next phase of expansion. The lessons learned during this period about governance, delegation, and the limits of central authority would shape the empire for generations, ensuring that the legacy of Genghis Khan endured long after his death. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had reached unprecedented breadth, stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the heartlands of China, Persia, and Eastern Europe. Yet despite this enormous territorial expanse, The Mongols faced the challenge of administering sedentary, densely populated civilizations vastly different from their own nomadic culture. It was in this context that Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, emerged as a transformative figure, one whose vision would reshape not only the Mongol Empire, but the history of China itself. Kublai was born in 1215 to Taoyui, the youngest son of Genghis Khan, and grew up immersed in both Mongol and Chinese cultural influences. He understood the value of incorporating local knowledge and governance structures into Mongol rule. In 1260, following a succession dispute after the death of Great Khan Möngke, Kublai claimed leadership of the empire, though his authority was contested by other Mongol princes. After a protracted civil war against his brother Erik Bok, Kublai emerged victorious, consolidating power and becoming the undisputed Great Khan. This victory, however, came at a cost. It marked the beginning of the de facto fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into semi-independent Khanates, with Kublai ruling the eastern portion while the western Khanates retained relative autonomy. In 1271, Kublai officially proclaimed the establishment of the Yuan Dynasty, signaling not merely a conquest, but the foundation of a Chinese dynasty under Mongol rule. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on military conquest and steppe governance, Kublai recognized that ruling China required understanding its administrative bureaucracy, economic systems, and Confucian traditions. He retained many elements of the Chinese imperial structure, incorporating Confucian advisors and officials into his government while maintaining Mongol authority over key military and strategic decisions. This hybrid approach allowed him to effectively govern a civilization far larger and more complex than the Mongol steppe tribes. Kublai Khan's reign emphasized integration and infrastructure. He invested heavily in consolidating control over the fertile river valleys, trade centers, and urban hubs of China. He strengthened the Grand Canal, repaired roads, and expanded postal relay systems to ensure communication across the empire. Trade along the Silk Road flourished under his rule, with caravans moving goods, technologies, and ideas between China, Central Asia, and Europe. Kublai also maintained a policy of religious tolerance, allowing Buddhists, Taoists, Muslims, and Christians to practice their faith freely, a strategy designed to secure loyalty and stability in a diverse empire. Kublai Khan's military campaigns further demonstrated his ambition and strategic vision. He sought to finally subjugate the southern Song dynasty, which had resisted Mongol control for decades. Beginning in 1276, Mongol armies, employing both traditional cavalry tactics and advanced siegecraft, progressively conquered Song territories. By 1279, after decades of planning and military preparation, Kublai's forces decisively defeated the Song, unifying China under Mongol rule for the first time in history. This victory marked the completion of a long-term Mongol objective: full control of the Chinese heartlands, which provided economic, demographic, and strategic advantages crucial to the stability and prosperity of the Yuan dynasty. Kublai's governance was marked by administrative innovation. He divided China into provinces, Lu, each managed by Mongol-appointed governors, ensuring centralized oversight while leveraging local expertise. He implemented a structured legal code that combined Mongol customary law with existing Chinese regulations, allowing for consistency and adaptability. This approach helped maintain order across a vast and culturally diverse population, enabling the Mongols to extract revenue efficiently and enforce policies without provoking widespread rebellion. Despite these successes, Kublai faced significant challenges in balancing Mongol traditions with the demands of ruling a sedentary empire. The Mongols had been a nomadic warrior society, accustomed to mobility, simplicity, and personal loyalty. Governing an agrarian, urbanized population required bureaucratic skill, diplomacy, and patience. Kublai's adoption of Chinese administrative techniques and integration of local elites into governance reflected a pragmatic adaptation. He understood that conquest alone was insufficient without sustainable administration. Economically, Kublai Khan promoted agriculture, trade, and urban development. He encouraged the cultivation of new lands, invested in irrigation projects, and supported the development of markets and cities. The Yuan Dynasty became a hub of commerce, attracting merchants from across Asia and even Europe. Kublai welcomed foreign travelers such as Marco Polo, whose accounts would later inspire European interest in Asia. The integration of China into a larger Eurasian network under Kublai facilitated not only trade, but also cultural exchange, scientific knowledge, and technological diffusion. Yet, Kublai's reign also exposed the tensions inherent in Mongol rule over China. Traditional Mongol elites often felt alienated by the reliance on Chinese officials and bureaucrats. Conversely, many Chinese scholars and officials were wary of Mongol authority, creating a delicate balance that required continuous negotiation and political skill. Additionally, the demands of maintaining a vast military presence to secure borders and suppress rebellions strained the empire's resources. Nevertheless, Kublai's ability to navigate these challenges allowed the Yuan dynasty to endure for decades, demonstrating the Mongols' capacity for adaptation and resilience. Culturally, the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan represented a fusion of steppe and Chinese traditions. Mongol military and political authority coexisted with Chinese administrative practices, while religious and cultural pluralism encouraged innovation and exchange. The dynasty became a conduit for ideas, art, and technology across Eurasia, linking Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia in a complex network of commerce and communication. Kublai Khan's vision extended beyond mere conquest. He sought to create a sustainable empire that could endure long after his death. Kublai Khan ruled until he died in 1294, leaving behind a legacy of unification, integration, and administration. The Yuan dynasty represented the eastern apex of Mongol power, a sophisticated, organized, and economically vibrant empire that combined the military prowess of the steppe with the bureaucratic efficiency of Chinese governance. Kublai's reign illustrated the Mongols' capacity not only for conquest, but also for adaptation, demonstrating that even a nomadic empire could rule over one of the most advanced civilizations of the medieval world. In summary, Kublai Khan's era, 1271 to 1294, marked a transformative period in Mongol history. The establishment of the Yuan dynasty, the conquest of the southern Song, and the integration of Chinese administrative, economic, and cultural systems showcased the Mongols' ability to adapt to new challenges. Kublai's policies ensured stability, promoted trade, and facilitated cultural exchange, creating a legacy that would influence both Chinese and Eurasian history for centuries. His reign demonstrated that the Mongols, though originating from the steppe, could govern a sophisticated sedentary civilization while preserving the military and strategic innovations that had made them conquerors of the world. By the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire, once a unified force under Genghis Khan and his immediate successors, had reached the point of structural fragmentation. The vastness of the empire, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, combined with cultural diversity, logistical challenges, and the inherent limitations of centralized authority, led to the emergence of semi-autonomous regional powers known as Khanates. These Khanates represented the legacy of Genghis Khan's conquests, but also the practical realities of governing an empire of unprecedented scale. The first of these major divisions was the Golden Horde, established in the northwest by Bada Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan. Following the European campaigns of the 1240s, Batu consolidated Mongol control over the Rus principalities, parts of modern Ukraine, and the steppes north of the Black Sea. The Golden Horde operated with considerable autonomy, maintaining tribute from vassal states while coordinating military campaigns as needed. Its governance combined Mongol military organization with pragmatic administration, allowing it to extract resources, secure trade routes, and enforce political dominance over the region. The Horde's influence extended into Eastern Europe, shaping the development of the Russian principalities for centuries. To the southwest, the Ilkhanate emerged in Persia under Hulagu Khan, another grandson of Genghis Khan. Established in the 1250s after campaigns against the remnants of the Khwarazmian Empire, the Ilkhanate encompassed much of modern-day Iran, Iraq, and parts of Anatolia. Hulagu's conquest was marked by both brutality and strategic governance. Cities such as Baghdad, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, were destroyed in 1258, signaling the end of a major Islamic political center. Yet Hulagu and his successors also adopted administrative systems suited to the region, integrating local elites, promoting trade, and fostering economic recovery. The Ilkhanate became a powerful and influential Khanate, balancing Mongol authority with Persian cultural and political traditions. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate arose under the leadership of Chagatai, the second son of Genghis Khan. Encompassing the steppes of modern Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and parts of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, the Chagatai Khanate retained much of the traditional Mongol nomadic structure while also engaging with the sophisticated urban civilizations of the region. Trade along the Silk Road, particularly through cities like Samarkand and Bokhara, was vital to the Khanate's wealth and influence. The Chagatai Khanate was characterized by alternating periods of strict Mongol governance and local autonomy, reflecting the challenges of ruling a culturally and economically diverse territory. In the east, the Yuan Dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan in 1271, represented the easternmost and most centralized Khanate. Unlike its Western counterparts, the Yuan ruled over a sedentary, highly bureaucratic society in China. Kublai integrated Mongol and Chinese governance, balancing steppe traditions with Confucian administrative structures. The Yuan dynasty controlled the economic heartlands of China, secured trade routes along the Silk Road, and established a stable currency and tax system. While nominally subordinate to the Great Khan, the Yuan operated independently in practice, exemplifying how Mongol authority could adapt to the administrative demands of a complex, settled society. While each Khanate retained nominal loyalty to the Great Khan, the practical reality was political autonomy. Communication across thousands of kilometers remained slow despite the Mongol postal relay system, and local Khans wielded substantial authority in both military and civil matters. Conflicts of succession, inter-Khanate rivalries, and differing administrative priorities gradually diminished the cohesion of the Mongol Empire as a unified entity. This fragmentation did not signify immediate decline, but rather reflected the empire's adaptation to geographical, cultural, and logistical realities. The relationship between the Khanates was complex. Alliances were often temporary, based on shared interests such as trade security or military campaigns. Diplomatic missions and marriages were used to maintain connections, but rivalries were frequent, particularly between the eastern and western branches. For example, disputes between the Yuan dynasty and the Ilkhanate over trade routes and influence in Central Asia occasionally flared into military tension. Despite these rivalries, the Khanates shared cultural and legal frameworks derived from Genghis Khan, including the Yasa Code, military organization, and the use of the Mongol language for administration and diplomacy. Economically, the Khanates maintained the legacy of the Mongol emphasis on trade and mobility. The Silk Road flourished under their protection, linking China, Central Asia, Persia, and Europe. Merchants, envoys, and scholars traveled across the empire, exchanging goods, technologies, and ideas. This economic integration, even amid political fragmentation, was one of the Mongols' most enduring contributions, facilitating the transfer of knowledge, culture, and innovation across Eurasia. Cities such as Samarkand, Bokhara, and Beijing became hubs of commerce, culture, and administration, reflecting the Khanate's ability to govern and stimulate economic activity in both nomadic and urban contexts. Culturally, the Khanates demonstrated pragmatic tolerance and adaptation. Religious policies varied but generally allowed for the coexistence of multiple faiths. The Ilkhanate incorporated Islam alongside Mongol customs. The Yuan Dynasty promoted Buddhism while tolerating Taoism, Confucianism, and Christianity, and the Golden Horde maintained a flexible approach to the diverse populations under its control. This tolerance facilitated social stability and encouraged collaboration between Mongols and local elites, strengthening governance despite political fragmentation. Military organization remained a defining feature across all Khanates. Mongol armies retained the hierarchical decimal structure of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, emphasizing mobility, discipline, and strategic coordination. Generals like Subutai and Kublai Khan's appointed commanders ensured that military campaigns could be conducted efficiently, whether in the mountains of Persia, the steppes of Central Asia, or the plains of Eastern Europe. Even in regions far removed from the Mongol homeland, the military ethos of the Mongols endured, shaping regional politics and security for decades. By the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire was no longer a single, centrally unified entity, but rather a federation of powerful, semi-independent khanates. Each khanate reflected the environment in which it operated. The Golden Horde controlled the vast Eurasian steppe, the Ilkhanate integrated Persian traditions, the Chagatai Khanate bridged nomadic and urban Central Asia, and the Yuan Dynasty governed the rich sedentary civilization of China. While the Khanates shared Mongol heritage, military structures, and cultural practices, they increasingly acted independently, foreshadowing the eventual decline of centralized Mongol authority. Yet fragmentation did not erase the Mongols' influence. Trade, administration, law, and military innovation continued to shape the regions under their control. The Khanates preserved the connective tissue of the Mongol Empire, ensuring that, despite political decentralization, the legacy of Genghis Khan endured across Eurasia. The period of fragmentation was therefore both a challenge and a testament to the adaptability of Mongol governance. The empire could survive, thrive, and influence the world even as centralized control waned. In conclusion, the rise of the Khanates in the late 13th century represented the transformation of the Mongol Empire from a unified conquest state into a network of regional powers. The Golden Horde, Ilkhanate, Chagatai Khanate, and Yuan Dynasty each embodied the Mongol legacy while adapting to local conditions. Political autonomy, economic integration, military prowess, and cultural tolerance allowed these khanates to endure for decades, shaping the political, economic, and cultural landscapes of Eurasia. Though the empire would never again be as centralized as under Genghis Khan, the khanates ensured that Mongol influence remained profound, resilient, and far-reaching. By the 14th century, the Mongol Empire, once the largest contiguous empire in human history, faced a period of gradual decline and fragmentation. The unity forged under Genghis Khan and maintained by his immediate successors had weakened, challenged by internal strife, overextended territories, and the difficulties of governing culturally diverse and geographically vast lands. The 1300s witnessed the gradual erosion of Mongol dominance across both the eastern and western regions of the empire, Yet their influence continued to echo through trade, politics, and culture. In the East, the Yuan Dynasty in China experienced mounting challenges by the early 14th century. Although Kublai Khan had successfully integrated Mongol and Chinese governance, his successors struggled to maintain control over a vast and sophisticated society. By the 1320s and 1330s, the Yuan emperors faced administrative corruption, factionalism, and economic strain. Heavy taxation, combined with natural disasters such as floods, droughts, and famine, undermined the dynasty's legitimacy. Rebellions began to emerge, particularly from disenfranchised peasants and marginalized ethnic groups who chafed under Mongol rule. The Yuan dynasty also faced challenges in maintaining Mongol cultural identity while ruling a sedentary Chinese population. The Mongol elite, accustomed to steppe nomadism, often struggled to govern urban bureaucracies effectively. At the same time, Chinese scholar officials resented Mongol authority and sought to assert their influence within the administration. This tension between Mongol rulers and Chinese institutions weakened the cohesion of governance and contributed to growing instability. By 1368, widespread rebellion culminated in the overthrow of the Yuan dynasty by the Ming dynasty, led by Zhu Yuanzhang, who established a native Chinese ruling house. The Mongols retreated northward, returning to the steppes of Mongolia. But the loss of China marked a symbolic and strategic turning point. The eastern portion of the empire, the wealthiest and most densely populated, had slipped from Mongol control. Despite the retreat, the Yuan legacy persisted in infrastructure, trade routes, and administrative practices that continued to influence China for generations. In the West, the Ilkhanate in Persia similarly faced decline during the 14th century. After the death of Genghis Khan in 1304 and the subsequent rulers, the Ilkhanate struggled with succession crises, internal conflict, and financial instability. By the mid-1300s, the once powerful Khanate fragmented into smaller, localized dynasties and principalities. Regional leaders asserted autonomy, while trade networks and urban centers continued to function, preserving some Mongol influence even as political control weakened. The disintegration of the Ilkhanate reflected both the difficulty of maintaining centralized authority over culturally distinct territories and the limits of Mongol administrative systems when stretched across distant lands. The Golden Horde in Eastern Europe and Russia also experienced a decline in cohesion during the 1300s. Internal strife, combined with external pressures such as rising Russian principalities, weakened the Horde's authority. Cities like Moscow began to consolidate power, paying tribute selectively while increasingly asserting independence. Additionally, internal disputes over succession, coupled with economic challenges, eroded the Golden Horde's ability to enforce Mongol authority uniformly across its vast domains. Nevertheless, the Horde remained a formidable regional power, influencing politics, trade, and military affairs in Eastern Europe well into the late 14th century. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia likewise suffered fragmentation during this period. Internal divisions between Eastern and Western factions, combined with challenges from neighboring powers, weakened the central authority of the Chagatai Khans. By the mid-1300s, the Khanate had effectively split into separate polities, each governed independently while maintaining a tenuous connection to Mongol cultural traditions. Despite this, the region continued to serve as a key hub along the Silk Road, preserving the Mongols' legacy of trade, mobility, and cultural exchange. Several structural factors contributed to the decline of Mongol dominance in the 14th century. First, the empire's vast size made centralized governance increasingly impractical. Communication delays, local autonomy, and succession disputes strained cohesion across thousands of kilometers. Second, the Mongols relied heavily on personal loyalty and military prowess to maintain control, a system less effective once charismatic leaders died or were removed. Third, governing sedentary, complex societies like China and Persia required administrative skills, bureaucratic knowledge, and cultural adaptation that could not be easily transmitted from steppe traditions. Despite these challenges, the Mongols' lasting impact persisted. Trade networks established under Mongol rule remained active, linking China, Central Asia, Persia, and Europe. Ideas, technologies, and cultures continued to flow along these routes, facilitating innovations in astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and warfare. The Mongols' promotion of religious tolerance allowed diverse populations to coexist, preserving social stability even as political authority weakened. Their legal and administrative practices influenced successor states long after direct Mongol rule had ended. The decline was gradual, not sudden. The 14th century did not witness a collapse of Mongol civilization, but rather a transformation. Central authority waned, regional powers gained autonomy, and local elites assumed greater responsibility for governance. Yet the Mongols' military strategies, organizational innovations, and cultural legacies continued to shape the political and social landscapes of Eurasia. Formerly conquered territories retained Mongol influence through trade, law, and cultural integration, demonstrating that even in decline, the Mongols' reach remained profound. In Europe, the retreat of the Golden Horde allowed Russian principalities to consolidate power. Moscow, in particular, began to emerge as a dominant force, eventually leading to the formation of a centralized Russian state. In Persia, fragmented successor states preserved aspects of Mongol governance, blending steppe traditions with local Persian institutions. In China, the Ming Dynasty incorporated aspects of Mongol administration while reasserting native Chinese control. These outcomes illustrate that Mongol decline did not erase their influence. Rather, it transformed the political and cultural landscapes across Eurasia. By the end of the 14th century, the Mongol Empire's political unity had dissolved, but the empire's legacy endured in trade, administration, and cultural integration. The Mongols had demonstrated that a nomadic people from the steppes could conquer and govern sedentary civilizations, connect vast territories through commerce and communication, and leave an enduring imprint on the world's history. The decline in the east and west marked the end of direct Mongol rule but underscored the resilience and adaptability of their systems, which continued to shape Eurasian history long after the empire's fragmentation. In conclusion, the 1300s witnessed the gradual decline of Mongol dominance across both eastern and western regions of the empire. The Yuan Dynasty fell to the Ming in 1368, the Ilkhanate fragmented into local dynasties in Persia, and the Golden Horde lost cohesion in Eastern Europe. Despite these losses, Mongol influence persisted through trade networks, administrative practices, legal codes, and cultural exchange. The empire's decline was not an end but a transformation. The Mongols' reach remained enduring, and their innovations in governance, warfare, and cultural integration continued to shape Eurasia for centuries. The Mongols are often remembered in history for their ferocity and conquest, their lightning-fast cavalry, and the unparalleled scope of their empire. Yet the reality of life under Mongol rule was far more complex than tales of devastation suggest. The Mongols were not only conquerors, but also administrators, traders, and facilitators of cultural exchange. Their governance, legal structures, and social policies shaped the daily lives of millions across Eurasia, blending strict discipline with pragmatic tolerance. At the heart of Mongol administration was the Yasa, a codified set of laws attributed to Genghis Khan. While the Yasa was never formally written down in a single surviving document, chroniclers report that it encompassed military discipline, criminal penalties, social regulations, and administrative directives. The Yasa emphasized loyalty, honesty, and order, enforcing strict penalties for rebellion, theft, or corruption. It applied across the empire, providing a common framework that united Mongols, conquered peoples, and distant administrators. Under the Yasa, both nomads and sedentary populations understood the rules governing trade, taxation, and conflict resolution, creating a level of stability rare for the medieval period. Life for ordinary Mongols, particularly on the steppes, retained traditional nomadic patterns. Families moved seasonally with their herds, following pastures and water sources. Herding livestock, horses, sheep, goats, and camels was essential for sustenance, trade, and military readiness. Mongol children learned riding, archery, and survival skills from an early age, preparing them for a life in which mobility and martial skill were paramount. This upbringing produced a highly disciplined population capable of contributing to the empire's military campaigns and administration. For conquered peoples, Mongol rule could be both oppressive and surprisingly tolerant. The Mongols employed a pragmatic approach to governance, often allowing local rulers to retain authority under Mongol oversight. Cities in China, Persia, and Central Asia were not destroyed if they submitted and paid tribute. In fact, local administrators were often co-opted into the Mongol system. This approach ensured that infrastructure, agriculture, and trade continued to flourish even under foreign rule. Artisans, merchants, and scholars could maintain their livelihoods, while urban populations experienced a degree of stability uncommon in other medieval empires. Trade was a cornerstone of life under the Mongols. The empire's vast territory and relatively secure borders allowed the Silk Road to flourish as never before. Caravans moved goods such as silk, spices, precious metals, textiles, and ceramics from China to Persia and Europe. Merchants operated with protections enforced by Mongol authorities, and tolls and taxes were standardized to facilitate commerce rather than inhibit it. Cities like Samarkand, Bokhara, and Beijing became vibrant centers of trade and culture, where goods, technologies, and ideas flowed freely across ethnic and geographic boundaries. Religious life under the Mongols was remarkably tolerant for the medieval world. Mongol rulers recognized that imposing a single religion would provoke resistance. Instead, they allowed Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Taoists to practice their faith freely. Temples, mosques, and churches operated openly, and religious leaders often advised Mongol rulers. This policy of religious pluralism helped maintain social cohesion across the empire's diverse population, encouraging collaboration between Mongols and subject peoples and reducing the likelihood of large-scale uprisings motivated by religious dissent. Women played a particularly notable role under Mongol rule, reflecting the egalitarian tendencies of steppe nomadic culture. Mongol women were involved in the daily management of the household and herds, but they could also wield significant influence in politics and military affairs. Elite women, particularly those from Genghis Khan's family, often advised khans, mediated disputes, and even led campaigns when necessary. The role of women contrasted sharply with that in many contemporary sedentary civilizations, giving Mongol society a distinctive social flexibility that contributed to its administrative effectiveness. Military service was central to life under the Mongols, but it was integrated with civil responsibilities. Every able-bodied male was trained in horsemanship, archery, and survival skills. The Mongol army was organized with a decimal system of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, ensuring discipline, mobility, and merit-based leadership. Conquered populations were sometimes incorporated into these military units, contributing to the Mongols' ability to field large, efficient armies. Even civilians benefited from this system indirectly. The military presence protected trade routes, ensured stability, and enforced laws across the empire. Cultural exchange under the Mongols was profound. The empire connected distant regions, facilitating the movement of scientists, artists, and scholars. Persian astronomers contributed to Chinese calendrical science. Chinese engineers advised on siegecraft in Persia and Central Asia. European travelers, most famously Marco Polo, documented their experiences, spreading knowledge of Mongol governance and culture to the West. This cross-cultural interaction accelerated technological and intellectual transfer across Eurasia, making life under Mongol rule not merely about survival, but about participation in a vibrant, interconnected world. Taxation under the Mongols was systematic but generally pragmatic. While heavy taxes could be levied in some areas, the Mongols recognized that prosperity encouraged loyalty. Agricultural productivity was taxed according to standardized assessments. Trade was regulated for the benefit of both merchants and the state, and tribute from conquered territories provided essential resources for administration and military campaigns. The Mongol system emphasized accountability, with local officials often directly responsible for tax collection and reporting to central authorities. Urban life under Mongol rule reflected a fusion of steppe and sedentary traditions. Cities such as Karakorum, the Mongol capital under Ögedei and later Kublai, became hubs of administration, commerce, and culture. Streets were lined with markets, religious institutions, and administrative offices. Postal relay stations, YAM, ensured communication across the empire, facilitating governance, trade, and military coordination. While Mongol elites maintained distinct cultural practices, including dress, cuisine, and ceremonial traditions, they actively engaged with the local populations they governed, creating a hybrid cultural environment. Despite the reputation for brutality, Mongol rule was also marked by efficiency and order. Rebellions were swiftly suppressed, but compliant populations often enjoyed a high degree of stability, security, and economic opportunity. Scholars, merchants, and artisans could prosper under Mongol protection, and trade, infrastructure, and communication networks remained secure. The empire's legal and administrative systems created predictability in governance, reducing arbitrary violence in many regions compared to contemporary states. In conclusion, life under the Mongols was multifaceted. Beyond the image of a merciless conquering force, the Mongols were effective administrators, facilitators of trade, and promoters of cultural and religious exchange. They balanced military might with administrative innovation, allowing diverse populations to coexist and thrive. Women exercised influence, trade flourished, religions were tolerated, and the empire's vast territories were interconnected through communication networks. Mongol rule transformed daily life across Eurasia, leaving a legacy that persisted long after the decline of centralized authority. In essence, the Mongols were not only conquerors but also architects of an interconnected Eurasian world, shaping the political, economic, and cultural lives of millions. Their impact on life under their rule reveals a civilization capable of balancing ruthless efficiency with practical governance, creating conditions for trade, intellectual exchange, and social stability that would influence generations to come. The story of life under the Mongols is one of complexity, adaptation, and enduring influence, a narrative that complements their reputation as the conquerors of the world. From 1206 to 1368, the Mongol Empire rose from the harsh, unforgiving steppes of Mongolia to become the largest contiguous empire in human history. Its rapid expansion reshaped political boundaries, transformed trade networks, and connected cultures from China to Europe in ways previously unimaginable. The Mongols' influence was not confined to the battlefield. It permeated administration, commerce, culture, and knowledge, leaving a legacy that continued to reverberate long after the empire's fragmentation. The foundation of the Mongol Empire by Genghis Khan established a model of conquest that combined ruthless efficiency with remarkable administrative innovation. By uniting the disparate Mongol tribes in 1206, he created not only a military force capable of overwhelming even the most fortified civilizations, but also a governance structure that allowed for long-term stability. The Yasa Code, a merit-based military organization and systematic incorporation of conquered peoples into the empire, created a political framework that could sustain the Mongols' rapid expansion. These systems provided the foundation for their successors to govern vast and culturally diverse territories effectively. One of the most enduring aspects of the Mongol legacy was their impact on trade and commerce. By ensuring relative security across the Silk Road, the Mongols facilitated unprecedented movement of goods, people, and ideas. Caravans transported silk, spices, precious metals, and textiles across Eurasia, connecting markets from Beijing to Baghdad and Venice. Cities along these trade routes, such as Samarkand, Bokhara, and Karakoram, thrived as cosmopolitan centers of commerce and cultural exchange. The Mongols' commitment to protecting merchants and regulating trade routes allowed economic integration on a scale never seen before, setting a precedent for future global trade networks. Cultural exchange under the Mongols was equally transformative. By linking Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia, the Mongols accelerated the diffusion of knowledge and technology. Persian mathematicians contributed to Chinese astronomy, Chinese engineers advised on Middle Eastern siegecraft, and European travelers, including Marco Polo, recorded the empire's innovations and governance practices, spreading knowledge of Asia to the West. These interactions facilitated the transmission of printing techniques, papermaking, gunpowder technology, and medical knowledge across continents. The Mongols' empire became a conduit for human ingenuity, bridging civilizations that had previously developed in relative isolation. The Mongols also demonstrated an unprecedented level of religious tolerance. In contrast to many contemporary empires, they did not impose a single faith on conquered populations. Instead, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Taoism, and local religious practices coexisted under Mongol oversight. Religious leaders were often incorporated into governance or consulted for advice, ensuring stability and loyalty across diverse populations. This pluralism allowed cultures to retain their identities, even as they became part of a broader Mongol framework, creating an empire where diversity could thrive rather than ignite rebellion. Military innovation was another significant component of the Mongol legacy. The Mongols perfected the use of mobile cavalry, strategic intelligence, and psychological warfare. Their armies could travel hundreds of miles in days, adapt to diverse terrains, and execute complex battlefield maneuvers. Siegecraft was adapted from conquered cultures, particularly in China and Persia, allowing Mongols to overcome fortified cities that had withstood previous invaders. These military innovations influenced subsequent generations of armies across Eurasia, shaping both defensive and offensive strategies long after the Mongols' political dominance had waned. In governance, the Mongols blended nomadic traditions with local administrative systems, setting a model for hybrid rule. In China, the Yuan Dynasty incorporated Confucian bureaucrats and maintained existing administrative structures while retaining ultimate Mongol authority. In Persia, the Ilkhanate combined Mongol military oversight with Persian civil administration. Even in the Golden Horde and Chagatai Khanate, Mongols allowed local elites to govern in accordance with Mongol law and military supervision. This pragmatic approach allowed Mongols to manage territories far beyond their native steppe lands and provided a template for future empires seeking to rule diverse populations. Socially, The Mongols influenced gender dynamics and family structures, particularly in nomadic regions. Mongol women wielded considerable influence, managing households, herds, and even political or military affairs. They could negotiate alliances, advise khans, and occasionally lead in the absence of male leaders. This level of female agency contrasted with many contemporary civilizations, demonstrating how Mongol social structures could adapt to the practical needs of nomadic life while affecting broader governance. Even after the empire fragmented into the four Khanates, the Yuan Dynasty, Golden Horde, Ilkhanate, and Chagatai Khanate, the Mongol legacy persisted. The Khanates preserved elements of Mongol administration, trade networks, military organization, and cultural practices. The Silk Road remained active. Political and military strategies continued to evolve from Mongol models, and Mongol influence persisted in law, taxation, and governance. The fragmentation did not erase their achievements. Rather, it dispersed them across Eurasia, influencing subsequent civilizations in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The Mongols' cultural and technological impact extended beyond immediate political structures. The transmission of paper currency, postal relay systems, gunpowder, and printing technology shaped economic and military developments across Eurasia. Diplomacy under Mongol rule created new networks of communication, linking distant regions and fostering international relations. Knowledge of Mongol administration and military practices influenced rulers, generals, and merchants who interacted with or inherited territories once under Mongol control. In historical memory, the Mongols occupy a paradoxical space. European chronicles often emphasize fear, destruction, and terror, focusing on massacres and the overwhelming speed of conquest. Persian and Chinese sources provide detailed accounts of governance, administration, and cultural engagement, revealing an empire capable of sophisticated control and adaptability. The truth lies between these extremes. The Mongols were ruthless warriors and visionary administrators whose achievements reshaped the medieval world. Their reputation for brutality was inseparable from their strategic acumen and capacity for governance. The Mongols also fundamentally reshaped political boundaries and demographic patterns. The rise and fall of the Khanates influenced the development of Russia, Persia, China, and Central Asia. Cities destroyed or rebuilt under Mongol rule often became centers of power, while migration patterns, trade networks, and military campaigns altered population distributions. Even in decline, the Mongols left behind political and cultural structures that guided successor states, demonstrating the enduring imprint of their rule on Eurasian history. In conclusion, the legacy of the Mongols extends far beyond conquest. From 1206 to 1368, they connected civilizations, fostered trade and cultural exchange, promoted religious tolerance, and innovated in governance, law, and military organization. They were both destroyers and builders, capable of terrifying destruction, but also of creating systems that allowed diverse peoples to coexist and prosper under a unified framework. Their influence persisted through the Khanates, trade networks, military tactics, and cultural exchange long after centralized Mongol authority faded. The story of the Mongols is ultimately one of ambition, adaptation, and enduring impact. From the endless steppes of Mongolia to the urban centers of China, Persia, and Europe, their empire reshaped the medieval world. They demonstrated that a nomadic people could not only conquer, but also govern, administer, and connect vast territories. The echoes of their civilization persist in the political, economic, and cultural landscapes of Eurasia, reminding us that even empires that fragment or fall leave enduring legacies. The Mongols' shadow stretches across history, a testament to the power of vision, organization, and relentless adaptability in shaping human civilization.